shock! While talks of peace are happening in Istanbul, Russia is preparing for a new bloodbath. Ukrainian soldiers are sounding the alarm. The enemy's summer offensive has begun. Meanwhile, Russia is once again threatening with the Oreshnik. What is the Kremlin really preparing? Russian ships and aircraft reduced to rubble. The Ukrainian armed forces showcased a powerful drone that shredded both the enemy's equipment and their so-called unmatched technology. Watch the report for all the details.
A direct hit. Ukrainian soldiers used a drone to destroy a Tor air defense missile system in temporarily occupied Kakhovka. And here is the spectacular work of the Typhoon drone unit destroying occupiers in the Pokrovsky direction. The negotiations planned for today, May the 15th in Turkey, have not eased the situation at the front.
We're not talking about a ceasefire. The discussion is about the Russian Belarus offensive and our defensive actions. Moreover, the intensity of combat operations has increased in some directions that the Russians consider to be their priorities, their key areas. The intensity has risen, both in the number of assault actions and in the shelling using aviation and artillery weapons employed by the Russian Federation.
It seems that Europeans do not believe the war will end anytime soon. In particular, France has decided to transfer to Ukraine all Caesar self-propelled artillery units that will be produced throughout 2025. Russia is receiving a worthy response to its aggression. A real war is raging in the skies over Donetsk region, where enemy reconnaissance and strike aircraft, considered among the most effective in the occupying army, are being destroyed.
First of all, it is obvious that the offensive actions characteristic of this spring will smoothly, yet very loudly, accompanied by the roar of artillery fire, transition into the summer offensive campaign that Russia is planning, which, according to the Russian Federation's plans, is expected to be large-scale. And accordingly, we are talking about the hottest directions at the moment. These are Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka.
The Russians are pushing power into Ukraine, but they can't defend their own territory. The Russian command continues to report to the dictator that the Kursk region has been completely cleared of Ukrainian defense forces. They also claim that the Belgorod region is supposedly free. But this information, of course, does not correspond to reality.
It is obvious that the tasks our troops continue to carry out in the Kursk region are painful for the Russians, because today the heights that are under the control of the Ukrainian defense forces, the border heights, allow us to strike at the enemy's logistics, first and foremost, to strike at those units that are trying to push our defense forces out of the Kursk region. Our presence in the Kursk region today prevents the Russians from being able to launch a broader offensive campaign against the Sumy region. Accordingly, the Ukrainian defense forces have already created, and to a large extent, established a kind of sanitary buffer zone for us here.
The Russian authorities aim to reach a monthly mobilization figure of 50 to 60,000 throughout 2025. However, for now, they prefer to send poorly trained recruits into grueling infantry assaults in order to seize as much Ukrainian territory as possible.
If you compare the first week of the war, May to the second, on some fronts, the numbers have almost doubled. This in turn speaks to our many active defensive actions, and accordingly also points to the very high level of activity and resources the enemy is committing to their offensive.
Putin is ready to use all possible means and methods to achieve his goals, including blackmail. Russian military propaganda has once again raised the topic of striking Ukraine with a ballistic missile known as the Oreshnik.
Even if we assume that some kind of Oreshnik exists, I think Putin would have used it a long time ago. So far, we see that this is just a bluff inflated by Russian propaganda, nothing more.
The head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kirilo Budanov, urged Ukrainians not to worry, since the GUR always informs about possible dangers. Intelligence officers also showed for the first time the greatest fear of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the Ukrainian Magura. It is credited with destroying 17 sea and air targets belonging to the occupiers. The damage inflicted on Russia is estimated at more than $500 million.
While the Kremlin publicly talks about peace, there is real hell on the front lines. Russia is throwing more and more manpower into assaults, literally covering the front with bodies. The losses are colossal, but in Moscow, as usual, they pretend that everything is going according to plan. Why is the Kremlin turning on the meat grinder mode again? What is behind this? The whole truth about the real price of Putin's ceasefire, coming up next.
Russia is intensifying its meat grinder assaults on the front. And all this is happening against the backdrop of Putin's statements about being ready for peace talks with Ukraine. According to analysts from the Institute for the Study of War, the Kremlin continues to increase the number of its troops for political gain, while the Russian command habitually ignores the colossal losses in manpower.
At present, the Russian military is prioritizing the deployment of poorly trained conscripts in infantry assaults with high offensive intensity, aiming to achieve success despite a higher rate of casualties per square kilometer. This is being done in an attempt to pressure Ukraine and the West into conceding to Russia's demands amid ongoing negotiations. Russia is also trying to drag out the negotiations in order to extract additional concessions from the US while simultaneously achieving further gains on the battlefield. This is from a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
Putin is willing to accept significant losses in exchange for minimal tactical gains, analysts say. All of this is to create the image of a supposedly powerful Russian army and to try to put pressure on Ukraine during the negotiations. At the same time, the Kremlin has no intention of ending the war or agreeing to a complete and unconditional ceasefire.
Vladimir Putin has proposed direct negotiations in an attempt to bypass Ukraine's demand for a 30-day ceasefire. He wants to keep putting the negotiations in a position where it is Zelensky who has to make a move, not himself. A ceasefire is something he was never willing to agree to in the first place. And he has not softened his demands regarding the annexation of Ukrainian territory and the de facto destruction of the country's sovereignty.
The White House has stated several times that if the parties do not take steps toward each other, Washington will leave the negotiating track. However, this has not happened so far. Nevertheless, in press statements and social media posts by President Donald Trump, there is an increasing call for Putin to stop dodging peace talks and not to drag things out. And do you know about the gloom? It is unclear whether Trump will actually pursue peace through force. What is clear is that he is losing patience with Putin. And it is clear that he believes Putin wants too much. How this will manifest in action we do not know, because so far Trump has not put any pressure on Russia. Meanwhile, Ukraine's European partners continue to adhere to the common strategy. For peace talks to begin, Russia must agree to a full ceasefire for a month. The European Union is ready to tighten sanctions against the aggressor if it does not see progress in negotiations to end the war, said German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
What is at stake in Ukraine is nothing less than the peaceful order of our entire continent. At this historic, decisive moment, Europe must unite, more than ever before. I have spoken twice with President Trump by phone over the past few days. I am grateful for his support of the initiative for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Such a ceasefire could open a window in which peace negotiations would become possible in the first place. It is crucial that the political West does not allow itself to be divided. And that is why I will do everything in my power to continue striving for the greatest possible unity between our European and American partners.
Quite recently, Putin unilaterally declared a so-called ceasefire from May 8th to 10th. During these days, the Russian army attacked the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine more frequently than in April, according to the Ukrainian OSINT project Deep State. Experts have concluded that any so-called ceasefire declared by Moscow is, in reality, a simulation whose purpose is to prepare for and implement new Kremlin objectives, thus primarily military ones. Larissa Petrak, for free.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Freedom TV channel.
Putin's sea monster. While the front is falling apart at the seams, the Kremlin is pouring billions into the fantastic Storm project, a giant aircraft carrier that is supposedly set to be launched by 2030. Propaganda is already celebrating, but it's not that simple. Where are the money, the technology, the workforce? Or is this just Putin's new toy to distract from failures on land? Watch next.
Russia has announced that it will build the 100,000-ton nuclear aircraft carrier Storm. It is supposed to be laid down in 2025 and commissioned by 2030.
As I already said, there is nothing like it. In any other country in the world, I am confident that such powerful weaponry will reliably protect Russia from potential external threats and will help ensure our country's national interests.
The new aircraft carrier is supposedly going to have a nuclear power plant, stealth fighters, and a hull ready for Arctic ice, which will ultimately allow it to compete with American aircraft carriers.
Thousands of enterprises are involved in building the ship. There are only about 100 main ones. Basically, it's a large aircraft carrier. The Americans have a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier like this. Ours is 350 meters long. Just like the American one, 100,000 tons. Well, if we build it, it will be about the same.
Every year, Putin only talks about the flourishing of Russian shipbuilding and how Russians have long been ahead of the rest of the world.
In recent years, we have been implementing a large-scale program to modernize the Navy. Russian shipyards from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok are serially producing surface ships and new nuclear missile submarines. Significant funds have been allocated for these purposes. Over the past 5 years, 49 ships of various classes have been built.
But the reality tells a different story. With the decline of the shipyards and economic difficulties, Russia lacks the experience, resources, and technology to turn its fantasies into reality. They don't even have the planes that an aircraft carrier is supposed to carry.
A carrier for such modern aircraft like the Su-57. But at the same time, it should be noted that there aren't enough of them in the Russian aerospace forces, and they are not intended for or adapted to naval operations. The same situation applies to existing Russian fighters, such as the MiG-29K. They are not suitable for catapult launches from the shipyard, where Russia's only aircraft carrier, the aging Admiral Kuznetsov, is in dry dock. They can't even refit it, let alone build a new modern one.
And as of today, this can probably be confidently called not a repair, but a deep modernization. The number of systems being installed on this aircraft carrier to replace what was there or what wasn't working will definitely make it a completely different ship.
The point is that Russian shipyards at present are not even able to carry out basic major repairs on the aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov. This is a very telling fact. Everyone remembers the footage of technical malfunctions on Russia's only aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, which caused more skepticism than they provided any positive informational impact for the Russian side, not to mention the military aspect at the time. The carrier was being used.
The announced cost of building the aircraft carrier is $9 billion, which is much less than the actual cost of such a vessel. In addition, Russia is supposedly planning to build 3 more aircraft carriers to keep the West fearful in the Arctic.
We will continue to strengthen our Navy, including its strategic nuclear component.
Once again, I want to emphasize that the capabilities of the Russian economy are quite limited. In other words, all these bold statements about building carrier groups and maintaining a presence, primarily in the Arctic region, are attempts, so to speak, to counterbalance recent statements from the American side regarding Greenland and, accordingly, the increased naval presence of the United States in this strategic region.
Apparently, for the Russian authorities, creating something grand is not the main goal. The main thing is to invent and skillfully package dozens of propaganda shows in order to keep fooling their own people. Subtitles by Dima Torzuk.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode